Yo, what's up, everybody? Just wanted to get a chance to kind of talk a little bit about the endocrine system. And I'm not going into a really long, in-depth talk on the endocrine system in this video. I really just want to do like an intro video on the endocrine system because anytime you study the endocrine system, you find that a large majority of whatever chapter you're studying or whoever's lecture you're sitting into, or basically a large majority of what you typically learn in a class about the endocrine system are the hormones and memorizing all the hormones and where they come from and all that stuff. But the physiology behind it, the function of these hormones, why they do what they do and where they come from and all that, people tend to get that kind of skewed. So I kind of want to go in reverse. And I want to start with some of the most basic concepts about the endocrine system. And I know you're probably thinking, ah, man, he's just doing basic stuff. I don't need to listen to this. Well, it's usually the basic concepts that really gets people, that really nails them on the test. People can memorize hormones all day. They can memorize endocrine organs and structures all day, but they don't do too well in actually applying the information that they learn. So let me jump into that a little bit. First thing you need to know about the endocrine system is that if you're learning about it in any science class, the chapter is probably one big lie. It makes you think that you're going to study all about these organs and stuff, and you spend more time talking about chemicals and cells than in like a cell biology class. So rule number one, if you're going to talk about the endocrine system, you need to be prepared. The endocrine system is about secretions. A secretion is nothing more than a fancy term that means something that's been released by the structure that made it. That's a definition for dummies kind of way. So if a cell makes a secretion, all right, that means it's releasing something that it made. So when a cell secretes a hormone, that means that a cell made that hormone, and now it's releasing that hormone to go wherever it needs to go. Now, there are several different factors that you need, or several different things that you just need to remember about the endocrine system. That's one of them. Another thing that you really need to remember is the fact that when you're talking about the endocrine system, you need to know that everything's happening on a cellular level. Now, I know what we see and what textbooks generally begin to tell you about is stuff that you can actually see with your naked eye, things that are on a macro level, but the endocrine system functions on a micro level. So everything that you're learning about in the endocrine system begins on a chemical level and a cellular level. And really everything dealing with the endocrine system is cell-to-cell communication. So you've got this endocrine cell who is talking to another cell in your body, which could be another endocrine cell, or it could be a nervous cell, or it could be a muscle cell, or it could be any other cell of the body. But you got this endocrine cell who is talking to another cell, and it's using a chemical to do it. So unlike a neuron in the nervous system that sends an electrical impulse to do the talking, which can happen in just a matter of seconds, you've got an endocrine cell who's going to release a secretion, a hormone, a chemical, into bodily fluids. And now that chemical has to float around in bodily fluids until that chemical accidentally runs into the target cell that the chemical is going to bind to. Every endocrine cell releases a hormone that is specific for a target cell. So just like I might send a text message. I got my cell phone over here. All right. So I send a text message on my cell phone to somebody. I don't just send a text message and it just randomly goes out there in the ether and never arrives to anyone. As a matter of fact, when I send a text message, it's kind of just floating out there, but it has a destination. The endocrine system is not that specific. Like if I send a text message to my friend Jamal, that text message does not wind up going to his wife Vanessa. It winds up going to Jamal because it has a definitive location that it's going to. In other words, my text message has an inbox that it's going to wind up in. Hormones, not that specific. Hormones can wind up going to anyone's cell phone, but the thing about it is, it will not register that person's cell phone will not register that text message unless it has an inbox that fits for the text message. Okay. Now that may have been a little complex. You might be like, okay, that was way too deep. That was way too crazy. Let's keep it real simple. Let's talk about keys. All right. Pretend that a hormone is a key. If I had a key and it was specific for and it was specific for a very specific lock. All right. That key would only fit that lock. I remember when back in the day when I was in college, I had a 1992 Ford Tempo. Some people have heard me tell the story before. I had a 1992 Ford Tempo. And one day, some friends told me about this mall because where I was going to school where I was going to school, there were no malls, there were no stores. So it was like out in the sticks and the boonies. And so some friends told me about a mall that I could drive to in Greenville to go to. So I went to this mall, drove all the way up there, hung out at the mall all day, and then turned around and came out into the parking lot, stuck my key into my car, and it had a little hesitation going in, but it ultimately opened and I got in the car. And right when I got ready to start up the car, I looked up in the rear view mirror and there were a pair of women's underwear hanging off the rear view mirror. And I was like, what the crap? When I looked around in the car and I realized that that wasn't my car, but my key hit that car. And I quickly jumped out of that car, locked the door back, and there was my car like a row over. So I jumped in my car and drove all the way back to school. It was nuts. All right. So my key was able to fit not only my car, but I soon learned that there was a defect in the 92 Ford Tempo. If you had a 92 Ford Tempo or a 94 Ford Tempo, their keys all fit everyone's cars. So as long as you had a key, you could get into anybody's Ford Tempo. We played a couple of practical jokes in college after that. My point being is that if a key is a hormone, sometimes that key will actually fit multiple locks, or you could have a key that only fits one lock. What determines this? Well, it's the lock. And a lock in the cellular sense would be a receptor molecule, which would be located either on the outside or the inside of a target cell. So when I create this key, this hormone, it's got to fit the lock, which is the receptor, which is located on the target cell. And that receptor is either on the target cell or inside the target cell. Sometimes you can produce a key or a hormone that only fits one lock on one type of cell. Or you could create a key that fits a multitude of locks on a multitude of cells. So let's use two examples. PTH, parathyroid hormone. All right. Parathyroid hormone will only fit a limited number of locks. This hormone is released into the body fluids. It'll float around in your body. It'll come into contact with all types of cells, all types of tissues, but it will only bind to the receptor sites on specific types of cells. Remember, parathyroid hormone, its overall effect is to increase calcium concentrations in the bloodstream. So it's going to stimulate things like osteoclast. It's going to stimulate kidneys. It's going to stimulate the intestine to increase reabsorption of calcium. Anything to get calcium levels to go up in the blood. But that's only 3 locations. So, it doesn't target very many cells. So that tells me that not that many cells have a receptor site that their hormone can bind to. However, you take something like insulin, all right? That hormone, on the other hand, targets a multitude of different cells in your body. It's kind of like the Ford Tempo key. That dude fits everybody. And so it can stimulate a lot of different cells in your body to respond. So hopefully I didn't confuse you too much between, what's an endocrine cell, a cell that produces the hormone itself, which is the messenger, or in my example, the key. Then you've got a receptor, which is the lock. All right. And then you have a target cell, which the receptor is either located on or inside of. Now, the hormone, when it binds to the receptor site, it's going to stimulate the target cell to elicit a response. This is where it kind of gets tricky, because that target cell is going to elicit a response, and whatever comes from that response is ultimately going to be what the hormone is known for. All right. For example, oh gosh, there's so many different types. Okay, growth hormone. Growth hormone is released from the anterior pituitary lobe of the pituitary gland. So you release growth hormone. Growth hormone is released into the bloodstream. It travels through the bloodstream and it comes into contact with your muscle cells. Well, your muscle cells are then stimulated to expand, produce more specific protein fibers within the muscle cells, and it causes your muscles to grow. All right. Well, once you grow and you produce more muscle, guess what? You get stronger. All right. So a side effect of growth hormone is that the body becomes stronger, which is why people use and abuse human growth hormone a lot, because it makes them stronger, helps them build more muscle mass, produce more strength. Why? It's because of what the cell just finished doing. The cell finished growing. It finished producing more actin and myosin and all these other different protein fibers inside of the cell. So we're seeing a byproduct of this. Another thing that I wanted to talk about concerning hormones, and I'll bring up first, I need to do a screen share so you can see what the heck I'm looking at. I want to show you guys something from the slideshow. And the slideshow is going to look a little different on your computer and on the screen, because I'm running this on my personal laptop. I'm not running this on my regular laptop. So I've got a different type of, I got Open Office instead of Microsoft. In this slide, it talks about endocrine reflexes. Okay. In other words, you never release a hormone without something actually happening. The body rises and falls off of these reflexes. It honestly believes that if it releases this hormone, I'm going to get this response, which is going to give me this benefit. Okay. So the example that you see here is that the anterior pituitary lobe here is releasing a hormone known as TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone. You can kind of take from the name what it does. Thyroid stimulating hormone. It's a hormone that stimulates your thyroid gland. So this hormone is released into the bloodstream and it travels until it finally reaches your thyroid gland. And then the thyroid gland releases thyroid hormone. And when the thyroid hormone goes into the blood, then we're going to see something interesting take place, because when thyroid hormone gets into the blood, it targets most of the body cells of your body, and it stimulates your cells to increase its metabolic processes, which, a byproduct of that is you produce heat and you burn energy, right? You build more cellular structures and you repair more cells and you produce more cellular energy. This is a byproduct of the release of thyroid hormone. But think of this. I wanted my cells to repair. I wanted my cells to grow. All of this started with TSH. You got this little gland up in your brain that releases this hormone that tells the thyroid gland to release another hormone, which tells all the cells in your body to grow, increase energy, and blah, blah, blah. This is an endocrine reflex. And it's an endocrine reflex because everything was started by hormones. It was cascaded by hormones, ultimately to be controlled by hormones. This is an endocrine reflex. I released one hormone to get a second hormone to release in order to get a specific response. That is an endocrine reflex. When you have what's known as a humoral stimulation, this is an endocrine reflex, but this is a little different. In this one, you can see that something occurred, some type of biochemical stimulus occurred that led to a structure to release a hormone that then in turn acted to balance things out. Okay, say that again. What did you just say? Okay, What I said was in a humoral stimulation, in this type of endocrine reflex, it's not a hormone being released to get another hormone to be released so that you can get a product. Instead, there's a biochemical stimulus here. Something's off. Either something's too high or something's too low. Some type of biochemical change occurred in your body. Too much sugar, not enough sugar. Too much salt, not enough salt. Too much water, not enough water. Blood pressure too high, blood pressure too low. Too much oxygen, not enough oxygen. Too much carbon dioxide, not enough carbon dioxide. Some type of biochemical change is going on in your body. Something's too high, something's too low, and that stimulus triggers some endocrine cells to release a hormone, which in turn gets everything back into balance again. Now you're going to see a lot of examples like this in the endocrine system chapter as you're studying. There's a bunch of different ones that are just like this. And the example here is insulin. At some point in time, this individual winds up having blood glucose go up. Now, blood glucose increasing in your body is not a bad thing. I mean, when I get done with this video, I'm going to go over here and I'm going to eat a snack. As a matter of fact, I'm going to have some dessert. And my dessert is going to be some butter pecan ice cream. Yeah. Now, when I eat that butter pecan ice cream and when I eat my dinner, my blood glucose level is going to go up. Not because I'm eating an unhealthy dinner either, because I'm actually going to be eating a really healthy dinner. My point is that when I eat this food, there are going to be carbohydrates in my meal. And so naturally, the amount of carbohydrates in my blood is going to increase. Why? Because I'm going to eat carbs. Okay. So my blood glucose levels are going to go up simply because I ate a meal. So that's going to stimulate the cells in my pancreas to release insulin. I've got these endocrine cells in my pancreas, and their job is simply to produce insulin. They're going to release this insulin, and when they release the insulin, what's going to wind up happening is the insulin, the hormone insulin, is going to come into contact with numerous different cells in my body, all different types of cells all over my body. And they're going to stimulate those cells to open special channels on their cell surfaces to allow glucose to enter into the cell. They're also going to stimulate those cells to begin burning the glucose that they have or that they acquire and to actually store the extra glucose. So three things are going to happen. The insulin is going to stimulate my cells to start increasing the amount of insulin that they take in. They're going to stimulate my cells to begin burning this glucose that they take in. And then they're also going to begin to store some of the glucose that they take in. And that's part of the game that insulin is going to play in this one. And then the third type of endocrine reflex is a nervous stimulation. And this one, you kind of talked about a little bit in previous anatomy and physiology courses, especially if you took anatomy and physiology 210. And or for other schools, it's just anatomy and physiology 1. And in nervous stimulation, what occurs is we have sympathetic nervous system sends a signal, and this nerve signal stimulates your adrenal glands here in this image, and the adrenal glands wind up releasing a particular hormone. So in this case, we have the sympathetic nervous system, and the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal glands, which are endocrine glands, and those endocrine glands then in turn release these two hormones, epinephrine and norepinephrine. And if you hear some shaking and some rattling in the background, that's my dog. It's a 4-year-old puppy, not 4-year-old puppy, but 4-month-old puppy running around. So just ignore him. And if he winds up on the screen, yeah, he's cute and cuddly. But anyway, so I got the sympathetic nervous system. It increases in activity for whatever reason. It sends a nerve signal to my adrenal glands, and then my adrenal glands turn around and release hormones. Okay? Now, of course, this is going to be a really quick turnaround because the sympathetic division usually works out of fight or flight. So there's some type of emergency or some type of immediate activity that requires me to release epinephrine and norepinephrine. In this case, it could be something as simple as the anticipation of a high level activity. So you could be getting ready to go to kickboxing class, or you're getting ready to run a marathon, and so your sympathetic nervous system automatically starts shooting signals to the adrenal glands, and the adrenal glands release epinephrine and norepinephrine, and then those hormones begin to bind to the receptor sites on their target cells. Okay. There is one more thing that I want to talk about. I'm going to take this off of the screen share just for a moment, and we'll put it back on little old me. One last thing I want to leave you with before I shut this sucker down is that something that confuses people sometimes when you're studying the endocrine system is that there's a difference between an endocrine organ, an endocrine tissue, and an endocrine cell. All right. And this kind of gets individuals, and you know what? I don't blame you for it getting, because it can be kind of tricky. Okay. An endocrine organ is an organ whose sole purpose in life is to make hormones. An example of that is the thyroid gland. A thyroid gland, it's always making hormones. It's making thyroid hormone. That's all it does. You're not going to find the thyroid gland making a whole bunch of other things. It makes hormones. End of story. The pituitary gland, that is an endocrine. That's an endocrine organ, because the pituitary gland makes several different hormones: follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, growth hormone. It makes it makes all these different hormones. Antidiuretic hormone, ADH. Well, it really stores it more than anything else. So the pituitary gland, it's all about making hormones. That's all it does. Same thing with the thyroid gland. So both of those are endocrine organs, where the entire organ is responsible for making hormones. Then you have what's known as endocrine tissues. Excuse me. Endocrine tissues are when you have large groups of cells located in an organ. My throat is so dry, it's crazy. You have large masses or numerous groups of cells located inside of an organ. And that organ does things other than making a hormone. And that organ, splits its life up half and half. Half of its life is making hormones, and the other half of its life is doing other things. So an example of that would actually be the pancreas. Believe it or not, the pancreas is not an endocrine organ. It's a double agent, because half of the pancreas is making hormones like insulin and glucagon, and then the other half of the pancreas is making enzymes that help you digest food for your digestive system. So the pancreas is not really a true endocrine organ. It's more of a double agent. It's an organ that exists in the endocrine system and in the digestive system. So he has endocrine tissues. And then last but not least is sometimes you have endocrine cells, where the organ has like a small group of cells that produce hormones, but the gland or the organ itself doesn't have anything to do with hormones. An example of that would be the stomach. The stomach is not an endocrine organ, all right, but it has small patches of endocrine cells that produce a hormone called gastrin, which helps to regulate the digestive process. The small intestine is another one. The small intestine is a digestive system organ. Its job is not to make hormones, but there's a small patch of cells located in the first few inches of the small intestine that's responsible for making a particular hormone known as CCK. And CCK, one of its primary jobs is to target the gallbladder, to cause the gallbladder to release bile so that you can actually emulsify and help break down fats and fatty foods. So, those are two organs that are not endocrine organs. They just have a small amount of endocrine cells located in the wall of the actual organ. So that's hopefully that's a good intro to the endocrine system. Hopefully that'll get you started. If you got any questions, post your questions. I'm gonna be a lot better about replying to questions, whether it be in Google Plus or on YouTube. Remember, when you go to daprofessa Nixon, that's where we post a lot of our lecture material. But if you're looking for lab material, you can always go to the Professor 77 channel on YouTube. All right, y'all take it easy. Peace.